So first off, I have been messing around trying to figure out the technology that I want to use for this course. So I've kind of settled on one option, which I think should work. But if for some reason what I'm doing doesn't work for you guys, please communicate that with me so that I can adjust and move forward from there. But we'll figure it out. Should be good. So today we're going to get into chapter one of the history and philosophy of sport and physical education. So our big questions for today is why are we taking this class? What's it actually going to mean for you guys in a career? And to get down some of the framework, the introductory material. Maybe not the most exciting day ever, but I hope I do communicate that what the meaning is so that you understand and see the value in why you're taking this course. Because I think this is a course and a type of material that I undervalued for a very long time. And I mean that not just because I'm teaching this, but when I was in undergrad, I didn't quite see the reason I needed to know the history of sport and the reason why I needed to know the philosophies that led up to the ones that we have now, and why philosophy would even matter in exercise science, because it seems like a cut and dry, don't need to think a ton about the whys and the big questions in our field, but we'll figure it out. So, first off, history. The study of change over time. You guys know what history is. You've taken history class for the last who knows how many years. So historians can look at different things. Obviously, you can look at civilizations like you did in high school and middle school and all your school. You looked at American history, you looked at world history, you looked at maybe even your regional history or state history. And beyond that, history can kind of be a study of just about anything. You can do history of technology, you can do history of sport, which is what we're going to focus on. So you can identify these changes in sport and what, from the beginning, when you first had the first sports, the first physical activities, until now, how things have changed and why that is and what has occurred. So, for example, we can, a lot of what the early part of this class and the early civilizations we talk about use sport for is to prepare for battle and for warfare. So let's take the question, how did we get from this sword battle right here to our modern day kind of gentleman's sport, if you will, of fencing, something that was very brutal like sword fighting, to something that you have in the Olympics now that people end it with a shake of the hand. And so we're going to look at different things. There's the what, and that's pretty easy. So we can say, this is what happened. We know that because of this document, this artwork, this writing. And then from there we can get into why, which is a little bit more difficult. So why study sport history? It's going to provide a context and perspective for what you're doing now. So you can study, even in a short term, you can look at long ago civilizations and say, okay, they did archery as a means of survival, to practice for hunting or for battle. It was survival. Or you can even look just in the last 100 years and say, for example, I'm a distance runner, so I'm going to probably pull from the sport of running a lot. But you could say, all right, everyone across the country, every distance running program has a weekly long run. It's not really a question anymore of should we long run, should we not. Everyone just does it on a weekly or once every 2 weeks basis. But why is that? Why do we do that? And those questions can be answered by looking back at history. And you can look at documents, say of Lydiard and say, okay, Lydiard kind of created this concept of the long run, or a long event in the weekly training, because we were trying to capture this area that was lacking. Okay, now we have a deeper understanding of the whys we do things, and then we can implement it better in modern day. Helps us build and build and build, because you still have to have a understanding of this foundation to build to the next step, and even higher than you are now. You have to understand each step to do so, to continue climbing at a high level, a competitive level, a meaningful level. And also, history is cyclical, it's predictive. You can learn from things in the past to build towards what we're doing now. So let's take the pandemic. As I mentioned in my introduction, if you were able to watch that, I work with Baylor Athletics, particularly the track and field and cross-country programs here. So right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Things are changing. We no longer can get into the weight rooms as much, because there's limits of how many people can be in there. You have to clean more often, so there's less time available to put a team in a weight room. So you have all these different sports on campus that are now having to figure out what they're going to do without a weight room, something that's very essential to the training for each sport. So what do? Okay, let's look at what we did before there was this big arms race for facilities, because even 20, 30 years ago, you didn't have these crazy things going on that we do now. You have Clemson football has a water slide in their football locker room. My athletes have 3 $80,000 treadmills that they don't use that much. There's been this arms race to get all this fancy things in your facilities. So let's strip it away. That's no longer there. We can't use those facilities as much, and at as many people going through as we could before. So what do? We look back at that we did prior. So now we can say, okay, well, outside I can use bands, I can use free weights, I can use medicine balls, and I can build from there to kind of continue my program at a high level without these things that I've kind of learned to rely on. And history plays a huge role in that, to understand what we did before. So there's 2 general types of history. There's descriptive, that tells what happened. It's no opinions, it's just completely objective. It's the who, what, when, where, and just tells the story. No input. Now, interpretive is where you take a framework, a concept, and you apply it to this, the who, what, when, where, the descriptive part of things, and then you interpret it. You analyze the change over time. You give meaning to that. It's the whys, the hows. Why is it that our sport of sword fighting has now turned to fencing over the long history of time? And that's more the interpretive. And it's subjective. Each person has a different take on it. Even people who have very similar thoughts are going to have different thoughts, because we're different. And it really comes down to the exact model you're placing to understand something. So we have descriptive and interpretive history. Now, your sources for this history can be either primary or secondary. So primary sources come directly from someone who witnessed it. It's a first-hand account. So let's say a newspaper of a big football game in 1930. We can understand what happened from that, because the writer was there. We could take, for example, okay, looking at this nice little pottery work, you can say, all right, we know people in this time period were at war, or they were practicing for war, because we have this first-hand account. Someone was watching what they saw and made this pot. Now, secondary sources are where someone hears that story, the primary source, and writes their own or creates their own thing. So this is what a lot of our books now are, like a textbook. The person who wrote the textbook most likely wasn't there for the history of when things happen. No, they take these accounts. They say, okay, I read this newspaper article. I read this journal. I saw this photograph that someone took, and I've built it out, and I've said, okay, here's what happened. Here's what I'm interpreting happened based off of what's there. And the reality is neither of these sources are necessarily better than one another. Primary sources can be flawed, secondary sources can be flawed. It just depends on which best represents the scenario, which one is the most quality, which one is, do you want something that's just cut and dry, this is what happened, this is what I saw, or do you want someone who has taken what all these different people have seen and interpreting it and compiling it in one place? And each has its own purpose. So out of these general types of history, which is better, descriptive or interpretive, again, it just comes down to the quality. So for example, I put these pictures in. So one of the guys that I train with in my running he's qualified for the last 2 Olympic trials in track. I've watched the last 2 Olympic trials on television, and I've heard his stories. But the reality is, who are you going to want to read a book about? If you're trying to get an answer to what was it like to be at these Olympic trials, whose book are you going to read? His book about what it was like to be at the Olympic trials, or mine from watching TV and hearing a story or two? Obviously his. It's higher quality in this scenario. Now, if he had gone and said just napped the whole time, went to his race, went back and napped, and I had, pored over the results, I'd talked to hundreds of people and put something together, then maybe mine would be more quality. So again, it just comes down to quality. So philosophy. Now philosophy is, like I said earlier, probably not something that you link with exercise science a lot, or see a huge value in. But the reality is philosophy is going to be a lot bigger part of your career, most likely, or at least stages of your career, than you're expecting as an undergraduate. So, for example, to get this job, I had to write my teaching philosophy. I had to sit down and write, I think it was a 2-page paper going into my philosophy of how I teach, why I do that, and compiling it in one place. For my coaching job, I had to write a coaching philosophy. Again, 2-3 pages, I don't know, compile it up, write it up. This is what I do. Here's my framework. If I have some issue come up, here's my philosophy of how I address it. Similarly, when I came to Baylor here and I wanted to come work in this lab, I had to write down, okay, here's my philosophies of what I want to do, how I'm going to integrate all these different concepts of exercise science into my own research or my own teaching. Again, philosophy and writing that up is going to play a role in a ton of fields, and a ton of fields that are pretty diverse from one another that you wouldn't naturally associate philosophy with. But the reality is philosophy is just the study of knowledge, how you come to decisions. What's reality? What are your values? And by looking at the philosophies of people who have come before us, coaches, scientists, teachers, whatever it may be, you can formulate your own philosophy. And if you can articulate that better than the next person, you have a huge advantage. And I mean that. If you can explain why you do what you do, that's going to put you way above other people. Because I see it all the time. I'll go to research conferences and I'll ask, why did you do this? And they don't have a way that it connects to the real world or connects to an actual concern we have as researchers. And it kind of gets pushed off, dismissed. But if you can answer that and you can articulate those questions better, then your elevator pitches are going to be better. That means your quick little explanation of why something's important, why someone should give you funding for your business, why you should be able to implement this coaching technique, whatever it may be. If you can articulate those, I promise you, people are going to pay you more attention. So understanding your philosophy and developing it well is going to be hugely important. So there's different areas of study in philosophy, and I'm largely going to kind of move through these quickly. If you have questions about them, please reach out to me. I can explain them in a lot more detail, but it's not my strong suit. Maybe I shouldn't put it this way, but I have a more functional understanding of philosophy. Like, here's how philosophies need to be formed in my fields, rather than like, okay, here's the definition of this or that. So I'm going to go through these quickly. First off, you have epistemology. That's the study of nature of knowledge. It's studying knowledge itself. How do we get knowledge? What does this knowledge actually mean? Now, a branch off of it, well, we also have axiology. Axiology is the study and nature of value. This is ethics, good versus evil. You have aesthetics, what's beautiful, what's not that great, and politics, what's good for the common people. Now, so to kind of give you an idea of how this would apply within this course, you would say, okay, ethics. What is our ethics regarding a game of baseball? Well, that's the rules in place. If this happens, then you get a point. If this doesn't happen, you don't get a point. Beyond that, don't use performance-enhancing drugs. That's ethics. We have to have an ethical discussion on why we shouldn't use performance-enhancing drugs, or why we shouldn't be like the Astros and cheat in that fashion. And then the politics of sport, which maybe we could talk about at a different time. And next we have the metaphysics. So metaphysics is the study and the nature of reality. Within that we have ontology, which is the study of being, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have cosmology, the study of the universe. Theology, the study of God. It's what is reality? How do we know that reality is reality? And that sort of thing. Big questions. Not necessarily ones we need to get into in this class. So, metaphysics, the ultimate nature of reality, like I said, distinguishes between what's real and what's not real. Now, a branch off that, a smaller portion of that, is ontology. This is deals with the reality as related to humans and being. So, are you your body? Are you your mind? Are you a combination of both? How do those come together? And largely how we answer that question of how much we are mind and how much we are body determines how a culture approaches sport and exercise, as we'll talk about as we move on. So, ontology is going to be important, and the reason for that is because the relationship between mind and body and which one is more or less important changed over time. So, let's say you have a culture that is completely obsessed with body. What are they going to do? They're going to work out a ton. They're going to focus on health a lot. They're going to Their artworks are going to show pictures of muscular or powerful people or this standard of beauty. Now, if a culture focuses more on mind, then it's going to think more thoughts. Sports no longer really important. We don't need sports. We don't need people to be muscular. If we're a culture focused on mind and thought, we're going to be thinking. We're going to be really deep into those big questions of philosophy. And like I said, that changes over time. So, which do you think we focus on more? The development of minds as our modern day American culture, 2021, are we focused more on mind, body, equal parts of each, and why is that? Now, if my technology works, we'll pause here and I'll get a little bit of feedback. All right, so the reality is, believe it or not, we're actually in a time that focuses on body more than others. So let's take 500 BC right here. Plato was pretty harmonious. It was about 50-50 between mind and body. You need to have a sound mind, you need to have a sound body. Both need to be good. Neither is dominant. We need balance, harmony between the two. Now, as we move forward a little bit, we get to a point where the Romans were very focused on body. They valued strength and health and fitness and being able to compete in physical challenges better than the next person. Now, over the next 1,000 years, though, that dropped off. We get to this point at about the year 1000, where we're kind of hitting a low point and focus on body, and everything's about the mind. It's about the soul. Let's put a huge value on the soul. Everything's about keeping the soul healthy. But as we transitioned and we moved forward in time over the next 1,000 years leading up to today, we started to focus more on body. And we have beauty standards, we have health, we have physical games that are entertainment. We don't go watch a chess tournament on television typically, but we might watch a football game. You know, if there was a chess competition on TV and a football competition on TV, there's going to be people watching each, but most likely there's going to be, in 2021 America, there's going to be way more people watching the football game because we focus more on these challenges of body, of physicality. So there is a theory called the modernization theory. This means as we move through time, not Siri, theory, my Siri. So I had one time, and I teach anatomy lab here at Baylor, and I asked my students a question out loud, and Siri heard it and answered my question before my students could, which is interesting. But yeah, she was just chiming in when she heard me say theory. Okay, so it's this interpretive model where we're saying the change over time. You're looking at culture changing. There's pre-modern and then there's modern, and that change is pretty drastic. And that's kind of regardless of what we're talking about, whether it's sports or technology or whatever it may be. The focuses in pre-modern life versus modern life are hugely different. And as we go through time and we get more modern, farther along, these changes are going to become drastically farther apart. So let's take, for example, pre-modern culture. It's a pretty stable culture. There's not a ton of change occurring quickly. Within sports, we're really focused on our local area, where if we're competing against the next town over. We're competing within our town. It's paternal in nature. It's dominated more by men in sports, which we've seen as we move through time. One of the great things that's happened is we have a higher participation in female sports. We have more care, funding, whatever it may be, put towards female sports. That balance is starting to come closer and closer. And as we go through time, if the modernization theory is correct, it will continue to get closer, which is a good thing. Time is denoted by seasons and it's cyclic in nature. So these cultures aren't super worried about time because it's laid back. It's fall, it's spring, it's this, it's cyclical. One moment doesn't matter because we're in a cycle, it's circle, it's not a line, which I'll explain more hopefully when we get to modern. Family and community are woven into everything. So your family and your community are part of your work. You work for your family, you have a family business or a family farm or a community farm, and you're working together to provide for family and community, and that's the main focus. In our sports, it's all about family and community, this family versus that family, this clan versus that clan. And then a religion. Religion's also very family focused. And then additionally, we just aren't farther along in time, so there's more dependence on manual labor and muscle power. In sports, it's good to be strong so that we can then go to the farm and we can be strong and we can lift these bales of hay or we can move this rock out of the way, whatever it may be. It's focused on labor. And additionally, I'll say a lot of this is trending in my mind from warfare, especially in early times. Being physical activity was all about warfare, and you'll see that as a trend throughout this. Then we move forward, and now physical activity doesn't really have to do with war. Yeah, sure, the military is hopefully at peak physical fitness, but the common person doesn't need to be physically fit for war. Civilians don't do that anymore. Their physical fitness is for other means. So within modern culture, so in pre-modern, I want to say, this is a picture of Harvard football from, I don't know, early 1900s. If you think about early on football, again, it's local. You're probably playing the college across town, if you're playing the college at all. Maybe you're just playing within your college. You got team from this dorm, team from that dorm. They meet up and they have a competition. Now, we move forward, and over here we have, and this will be an example for as we move, this is actually a flights for University of Hawaii football. So you see University of Hawaii football is located right where my dot is. They flew all the way out to Detroit. They flew to Colorado, Tucson, different places in California, like San Jose. They also flew all the way to Sydney, Australia. And they're playing teams from all these different places. Sydney, Australia, I think was University of California, Berkeley that they played there. But they're playing teams from all over, which is representative of modern culture. It's very dynamic, and it's global. There is no limits. Hawaii football probably flew, I don't know, tens of thousands of miles within their season just to play football games. And there was people coming towards them in the games where they weren't flying away. So it's part of social structure. It's shifting with politics. It's shifting with economics. There's huge amounts of money getting thrown at collegiate sports now. I mean, insane amounts. It's becoming almost troubling. So not the time, but we can expect probably in the coming years, the NCAA is going to have a lot of issues because there's been this arms race to build facilities to be dominant, and now you're having this separation where all these schools can no longer afford to function as they were supposed to in athletics. They no longer are student athletes, they're now athlete students, right? at the highest levels, and there's now becoming this divide because of that. So as these politics and these economics of sport shift, we're going to see issues, or we're going to see changes. Whether they're good or bad, who knows? But that happens throughout time. Because now people want to pay to watch sports once the television is invented. When you can go watch TV and they can make money by putting it on TV, well, that's a lot different than, oh, yeah, let's meet up next Saturday, and if some people show up to watch, we'll charge them a few bucks. It's a lot different. It's more merit based. So to be able to compete in sports, especially on a high level, you have to be very good at these sports. It's no longer just you have to be one of the members of this village. Highly specialized, people are insanely good at their sports. You don't have, like back in the day, oh, so-and-so got injured. Hey, anybody in the stands want to come down and play? No, that's not going to happen anymore. It's very specialized. And it's no longer as family and community based. So, again, technology is going to improve. There's a separation between church and state. Time is now linear. We're moving from this point to this point. It's not cyclical. We don't care about seasons. We're just going down a line, which makes the minute mean more. One certain amount of time is going to be more meaningful than just this cycle of, yeah, we just play a game every year because it's part of our season. No, we're in a line. We're trying to accomplish something. We're trying to get somewhere, which is different than pre-modern culture. I think we understand these pretty well, I'm assuming. But yeah, things are just getting more formal. You have regulation and rules now. It's not like this village has different rules than this village. If my athletes go run, we ran, for example, conference was in Kansas this year. The University of Kansas has the same rules and track as Baylor University, as West Virginia University. No matter how far we're going in our conference, it's the same rules because we have this conference regulating it. Okay, let's expand even farther. Outside the conference, we still have the NCAA regulating it. Outside that, with the USATF, the United States Track and Field, so overarching group. Beyond that, you have the IAAF, which is the international rules. So there's all these umbrellas of rules, and as you go down, they're all the same, right? There's just minor differences, whereas maybe if we were having a race in 1900, if we were running a marathon, they didn't know how far a marathon was. It was just roughly 25 miles. Let's send them out. Maybe it's this town to the next. Whereas now it's very precisely measured. Things are more formal and more standardized. Again, things are just more specific. Things are more national and international. And we keep stats, which is actually something I like a lot. So we know what the world records are, whereas before no one really cared. Maybe someone would say, oh, there was this one guy 3 generations ago who was just superhuman ability, and he was the best ever. Whereas now we can say, we know who the best person is. We know who's the fastest. We know who hit the most home runs. We know who threw the most touchdowns in a season. We're very stat and record keeping rather than just telling stories of how great people were in the past. Now, something else that's changed over time is the industrialization and the urbanization. So obviously, a long time ago in the ancient world, there weren't huge cities. They had cities, but mostly people were villages. And as we move through time, these villages are starting to come together and we're building up cities. More people exist, so they're more compiled into one place. Cities are larger. which is changing sport. So your games now are going to go from what's okay to do out in the boonies versus what can you actually do in a big city. Obviously, hunting and fishing games, you don't go hunting and fishing in New York City or Chicago or LA. No, you go out in the rural area somewhere. So if I was to do a shooting sport, let's say I was doing, clay shooting or something, and I did that in the middle of New York City, I'd be arrested so quickly, right? It'd be crazy. You don't shoot guns in the city. That's going to freak people out. Now, if you're from an area like I'm from, I grew up in the middle of cornfields. I went to sleep every night hearing people out shooting their guns from mile that way, mile that way. It was normal. Very different. Similarly, you aren't going to go skateboarding where I grew up. There's like a road and it goes a mile. And then there's a four-way stop. Each of those roads goes exactly a mile. Like that for like 30 miles. It'd be really boring to go skateboarding there. But if you go skateboarding in the city, you got different things you can skate on. It's a lot different. So, additionally, you start to have parks where, okay, so we cut out a part of the city, and this is going to be a park. And in that park, we only have so much room. So we can make a few basketball courts, some tennis courts, volleyball, nets, whatever it may be, but you only have so much space. So the games have to fit into those areas. So like basketball springs up in these areas because you can fit a basketball court inside of a park. And additionally, there's lots of people in a city. So you can go play people. You can meet up at the park, meet someone you've never met before, and have a game of pickup basketball. I've done it with my friends. You've done it before. You go to a beach and bump into some other people and play sand volleyball for a while. Never talk again. You can do that when you're in an area with concentrated people. So, sport is just, the definition would be amusing oneself. So now that's more, the definitions become more of like a competition, usually of some sort of play and some sort of game. Play doesn't necessarily have to be sport. It doesn't really serve a purpose. So play is something that's non-utilitarian. If you go play a game, you aren't trying to accomplish something. You're just entertaining yourself. And often it's spontaneous. You just go play a game, or you go play this or do that. Other times you might organize it, but really, just it's playing. You guys understand that. So working definition of sport is a playful physical activity that has community, or continuity, which means it lasts for a certain amount of time. A sport isn't I go kick a soccer ball. No, it's I play a game of soccer. Has length to it. It's not one event, typically. It's got some sort of length, some sort of meaning to it. There's roles often, so maybe you have in soccer, you have your forwards, your midfielders, your defenders, your goalie, whatever it may be, and even within that you have left wing, right wing, whatever it may be. There's interaction with an audience typically now, and it's part of an overarching establishment. So you can go play soccer in lots of different places. It's not a game you invented with your buddies. That wouldn't really be a sport if you whatever, came up with some weird game to entertain yourself. There's other people who play somewhere. All right, so let's get through these last. We're almost done. These last philosophies here. So there's my mind's blanking on the word. So dualism and monism. So dualism is this idea that you have mind and you have body, and they're very separate things. Now, that was more of a traditional philosophy. A little farther back you go in history, they're separate. Now, modern philosophies are starting to merge the two, and that's called monism. And as I talk about these, I want you to think about it in the idea of exercise science and how we approach things as exercise scientists, as coaches, as teachers, whatever it may be. So like I said, as we talk about physical education, historically, it's been mind, body, two separate things. Now, as we move forward, they're merged together, and that's called monism. So mind and body aren't separate. The knowledge exists in the entire person. Your mind is part of your body. It's one thing. And the focus is not on the nature of the person, but how that person experiences reality. So if you're focusing really heavily on the nature of a person, what is a person, you probably split it out, you start to dissect it, and you say, here's the mind. The mind is this thing. The body is this thing. But when you merge them together, the focus becomes, okay, how does the mind use the body, or how does the mind and body interact to be able to touch this, to be able to move and experience and see what is around and process all these things as a single unit. So pragmatism was one of the first to reject dualism. It's one of the first to say mind and body are the same thing. So they argue that experience, and therefore the body, is where one begins to know reality. Again, it's that merging, and together you can process what's around you. But you need both. You need both. You need the body to be able to actually input information, and you need the mind to be able to process it. But they need to work together, because the body alone can't process the information it's getting, and the mind alone can't get information. So next we have existentialism. Soren Kierkegaard was probably one of the big names there. An argument within that field is that there is, by Kierkegaard, is there's three stages of life. There's aesthetic, there's ethical, and there is religious. Now, aesthetic would be like pleasure. This is how you derive enjoyment out of life. It's very hedonistic. It's very focused on what you can get, and that's ring number one. Now, as you move forward, internal, and you start to become more self-actualized, as psychology would call it. You get into ethics. This is okay. So we have all this pleasure that we can have in life, but ethics are now going to divide and say, okay, here's a line that we don't cross. I am married. I am not going to cheat on my wife because I have ethics. Now, as we move even farther inward, we have religious, and this would be this focus on the soul and focus on God and a religious experience. Now, Kierkegaard would argue that as you move inward, some are going to get stuck in those outside levels and never make it any farther. We know there's people who are very hedonistic. They're very focused on what they can get and the pleasures of life, and they don't care about anything else. They don't care about ethics. They don't care about religion. But as you move inwards, he would say the best would be if you can get to the stage of religion, because then you're going to be able to understand God better and take care of your body, mind, and soul. But you can only do that if you've kind of worked your way inwards. if that makes sense. Again, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm giving you my best shot at explaining these things. So we have other existentialists. You have Nietzsche. Excuse me, I pronounced that wrong. Existentialism demands that individuals become who you are. Then you have a different person within this field of philosophy with this quote. In the objective mode, I have a body, I train it, I use it, and in this regard, it can be viewed as separate from me. Okay, so objectively, you are to some degree separate from your body. You use this body, even if you aren't necessarily just this body, but the same body in the subjective mode means that I am my body and my consciousness is embodied or integrated in this subjectivity, which means from a personal standpoint, you are integrated into this body. You and this body are, to a large degree, one. You don't really exist as a human without your body. And that's the argument. And again, if you have more questions about that, reach out to me, and we can work through it a little bit. I know I'm not explaining this the best. It's kind of outside of my strengths. But I think in maybe a conversational way we can work through it better if you are having more questions about it. Our next one is phenomenology. It's like phenomenon with ology on the end. And this is an emphasis on epistemology. So the body accesses the world and knowledge. So the body is an instrument. It's how we actually interact with the world. Without our body, again, you can't touch, you can't feel, you can't see, you can't bring things in. The body has meaning and is not the enemy of the mind. No, the body and the mind work together to take in information and then process the information. And it really emphasizes experience. Because, again, you can't just sense and you can't just think. You have to live it out to understand the world around you and to understand who you are and what's going on and the whys of this world. The bigger questions have to be answered through both. Okay, last slide. Both the phenomenology and existentialism promote subjective experiences that enhance life. They promote movement and experiences within, and that the body is an access to the world. Experience is where one comes to know reality, not preconception. So that's a point that they emphasize, is that you can't have within your mind a preconceived notion of how things are. You actually have to experience it yourself to know what they are. You can't know things based off preconception. No, you have to experience it to truly know it. Beyond all these philosophies, your big takeaway for today is just understanding that as we go through this class, different cultures are going to focus on body more and some are going to focus on mind more. As we move through time, things change, and they're going to continue to change. And only by tracking these changes can you predict what is coming. Can you answer the questions you currently have at the highest degree, because you need a foundation to continue to build up. And then also, let's see, what's the other big takeaway for today? I guess we'll just leave it at that for now. I think, thank you for bearing with this. I know this has been a long, about 50 minutes. The other thing is just understanding that philosophy is going to be important to some degree to your career field. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but if there's one lesson I can leave you guys with, and I'll talk about this next year too when I get there and you take other classes with me, is understand why you do what you do. Be able to explain that, be able to understand it yourself, and be able to start picking out the flaws in your own whys. Because only in that way can you start gathering information from different sources and apply it to what you do and improve what you do. It's going to give you a lot more ways you can learn. It's going to be able to help you explain and defend yourself, and just do what you do at an excellent level. And I mean that. And we'll talk about that more, hopefully in this class, and definitely when I'm on campus next year. Anyways, thanks. Have a good rest of your day.